Have you gotten a sense that I love Windows? Well, of course I do. Guess what? I also love the Mac operating system, and I love Linux variants as well. In this nugget, let's give some love to the Mac OS and Linux, taking a look at ways in which we could do things like we do them in Windows, and also taking a look at some features and tools that are specific to these other OSs. Now, I've definitely got to warn you, you're probably not going to find many like me that love different operating systems, and I guess I can't blame them since every operating system is going to behave a little bit differently, and a lot of end users learn to love one system and don't like to change. If you look at this Mac desktop, for instance, notice that, oh look, Word is running, and how I can tell is there's a little dot underneath Word. So if I click this, Word will come back to the forefront. If I close this, we're not closing the Word application like we would in Windows. No, it's still running. We have to come down here, for instance, and right click and quit or do a file quit of Word. So it's little nuances like this when coming from Windows that might drive you a little crazy. But we must admit, certain operating systems are going to shine with their built-in tools compared to others. For example, we know there's really not a lot of robust tools built into Windows when it comes to backup. At least that's my opinion, yours may differ. If you're on a Mac, you have an amazing backup utility called Time Machine. Up here in the top, look at the top, you can see this little clock. If I click it, it says, all right, this is our Time Machine settings. Your latest backup was today at 1:20. I could trigger a backup now of this machine, or watch this, pretty cool, I can enter Time Machine. When we say enter Time Machine, it has this calendar over here on the right, and we can return our machine to one of these dates of the backup. We'll go right back there, and I could go to my Dropbox, for instance, and we would see versions of things in Dropbox as they existed on that particular day. And something that a lot of people love in this Mac environment with this backup is that it's so easy to do. All you do is plug in an external hard drive, for instance, a USB hard drive. Time Machine will see it and say, hey, is that the drive you want to use for Time Machine? And then it just starts doing its thing. We could even go to this Time Machine disk, create another folder on it now, and store other stuff here along with the Time Machine backups. Now, one of the things that we liked in Windows was we had built-in utilities to keep our disk in good shape. Well, that exists here as well. I'm going to go down to this Launchpad, and in Launchpad, I will go ahead and do a Spotlight search. Those are two features that we have on the Mac now. And I'm going to say disk, and it brings me to disk utility. The disk utility is showing me my drive, and sure enough, there are first aid options for this drive. It will check the volume for errors. It would then repair if necessary. I'm going to cancel this because this is something that I do routinely, and I happen to know that this disk right now is in a very healthy, clean, repaired state. But notice these built-in tools to help us. And what about updates? I mean, Windows certainly did a great job of keeping our systems up to date for the latest in performance and security enhancements. Do we have that in something like the Mac? We sure do, and it's controlled through the App Store. So right here, I'm going to launch the App Store, and notice there's a separate area for updates. So in one location, we're going to get updates for applications, like you can see here. My Day One Classic, my little journaling program, and Slack are ready for updates. And even operating system updates are going to be installed through this convenient tool. And it's really fun to watch operating systems play catch up with each other. For instance, something the Mac has always been good at is this concept of virtual desktops. Right down here you can see I've got something on my toolbar called Mission Control. And if I click on Mission Control, you can see up top here that we have this first desktop, and it's got Steam launched on it. And then there's this full screen Microsoft Word, and then there's this full screen Safari. And I can obviously switch to any of these desktops just by clicking on them. We can also arrange them now to follow each other in a side-by-side view. And this is something that Microsoft has always been good at, that now the Mac is finally playing catch up with. The Mac, as I indicated, has always been great about virtual desktops like this, and now Windows 10 is catching up with that. So these wonderful operating system features you see being copied by the other operating system manufacturers. And it's funny because they're all going to have their little name for things. For instance, down here, I think I may have called this the taskbar a moment ago, but a Mac purists would really dislike that. Because if we go into the system preferences, we see the actual term for this is the dock on the Mac. And notice in system preferences, we can control the size, the magnification, where it appears, whether or not it slides up and down, and all kinds of fun features for what's officially called the dock. In Windows, we had the command prompt that would allow us to run fun tools. On a Mac, we have what's called the terminal, and it functions very similarly. Like on a Windows machine, we could do an IP config in order to find out our IP address. Here, we would do an IF config, almost identical, isn't it? And we would get the IP address information associated with our adapter. In my case, I am running EN1 for the adapter, and notice I have the address 192.168.02 on this device. In Windows, we would have the Explorer to manage our folders and our files. On the Mac, we have something called the Finder. In Windows, we would have OneDrive in order to store our documents in the cloud. On the Mac, we have the iCloud functionality, specifically the iCloud Drive. So you begin to realize, my goodness, these operating systems aren't as different, at least from a usage perspective, as you might think. In fact, I really can't show a Mac without showing one of the most beautiful applications ever invented for it. And of course, we can run this on Windows now as well. This is Photoshop. And let's say our Photoshop is misbehaving on the Mac. Let's say it's literally not responding to our inputs. Well, we can go up to this little Apple icon right here, and we can launch the Force Quit window. Does it seem similar to you, this Force Quit? Sure it does, because this is a lot like Task Manager on the Windows side. So if Photoshop wasn't behaving, I would simply select it and choose Force Quit. It would say, are you sure you want to do this? And now we have just shut down an application that is failing to respond properly. Now, I mentioned this in a nugget where we were talking about the installation of operating systems, but if you were to go in, you have this startup disk option on the Mac, and you could install something called Boot Camp, which would allow you to boot this system to native Windows. That's right, not boot the OS X operating system, but boot right into Windows. We know that probably a more common way we would run Windows on this machine today would be to use something like VMware's Fusion. And it's no surprise I have VMware's Fusion right here. And look at this. I've got Ubuntu I can run. I've got Windows 8.1 I can run, Windows 10. I've even got Windows Server that I can launch very effectively on this Mac. Another feature that we love about Windows is Windows' ability to store our username and password information so we don't have to constantly look it up. Well, the Mac will do a similar thing. It's called Keychain, and the Mac will store your keychain information in the cloud if you want it to, so you'll have this information about usernames and passwords saved across all of your various Apple devices. Maybe you have an Apple Mac, you have a MacBook, maybe you've got an iPhone, you've got a couple of iPads, you've even got eyeglasses. No, just kidding. But you get the idea. We would have synchronization of the security information we need across all those devices thanks to Keychain. And again, it's just a wonderful time to be in computing because Windows and the Mac aren't the only choices. Here I just slid us over to our Ubuntu desktop. And in fact, you saw me installing this in one of our virtualization nuggets. We are powering this thanks to VMware Workstation. And I'm currently on a Windows 10 machine running this. So this is great. We can experiment with Ubuntu, make sure we like it, and then we could choose to install it as the sole operating system on our device. What did we see in the Mac? Well, we loved the fact that there was a built-in backup utility. Well, how about this? If I choose or type backup on the Finder inside of Ubuntu, sure enough, here is a built-in backup and restore capability. What about updates to the Ubuntu operating system? Well, here it says, look, there's a whole bunch of updates that are waiting for you. Would you like to install those now? So many of the same capabilities that we saw in Windows and the Mac exist here. By the way, that was just me providing my administrative credentials so that the Ubuntu could properly update itself. Now, you may have noticed that I didn't do a portion here for the Mac or with Ubuntu on antivirus and updating antivirus. And that's because there really isn't antivirus or anti-malware tools built into those operating systems. It doesn't mean that malware doesn't exist for the Mac or Ubuntu, but it just means they didn't need to build it in. They didn't choose to build it in. But as you can see, there's going to be plenty of options for you to add this functionality later on. We talked in this course at one point about AVG. Well, sure enough, they make an Ubuntu version of their software. And boy, you talk about similarities in the operating systems. As you can see, our Ubuntu is now finished installing those updates, and we need to restart in order to complete that installation, something that we're quite familiar with. In the Mac, we had an App Store. In Windows, we now have the Windows Store. In Ubuntu, sure, there's an App Store, and it even looks like an icon similar to the Windows Store. In this App Store, we can find additional software to add to our installation, to have us playing games, or maybe, dun dun dun, being productive in our business. Now, hardcore Linux folks say, Anthony, what you're really showing off here is just a graphical user interface over the Linux operating system. You choose Ubuntu with this pretty Ubuntu desktop and this taskbar-like thing over here, but the power of Linux is really from a terminal. And here you can see I've launched the terminal application on Linux, and it's the command tools that we use all the time in order to do powerful things. Well, CompTIA is certainly aware of this, and you'll see I have a nugget on our basic Linux commands that we can use at the terminal. So I certainly hope you'll be joining me in that nugget as well. So why don't we wrap up this nugget with how to shut off these various operating systems. With the Apple operating system, we know there's an apple in the top left, and we would click on that apple in order to shut down the system. In Ubuntu, we can see there's a gear on the top right. If we click the gear, we can shut down or log out the system. Whether we like it or not, desktops are still dominated by flavors of Windows. But more and more, we're seeing the Mac and Linux take off today. So it's important that we are familiar with the features that I've shown in this nugget. I will remember to show Ubuntu and the Mac as we work with various tools for securing systems and things of that nature as we move throughout this course. But the CompTIA A+ world is biased to Windows, I have to point it out, just like the world is still biased to Windows on the desktop. I sure hope you found this nugget informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.